Hi, I'm Bob Kraus, and I'm president of the Veterans National Recovery Center. And I'm here today with Austin Vechio, and he's going to help us walk through some of the important issues that have come with the entry of transgendered people into the military. Austin was in the U.S. Air Force, and he has some important stories to tell about discrimination, about cover-ups that affected his rights as a transgendered person. And I'd like to ask you first, Austin, if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself, what, why you wanted to get into the military, when you joined, and some of the sequencing before trouble erupted.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. First of all, thanks for coming out and taking the time to interview with me and kind of get this information out there. So, I first enlisted into the Air Force, the delayed entry program, right after my 17th birthday. That was actually my 17th birthday present. It was a ride to the recruiter's office with my father and got that ball rolling. And I actually went to basic training on 7th of August of 2018. So at that point, I enlisted as female. And as you know, Trump had kind of announced those tweets on Twitter in the summer months of 2017. So it left a lot of uncertainty on what was going to happen, what the policy was going to be. And at that point, I was kind of forced to enter as female and kind of figure out the rest later. And that was a big question mark. So as you can imagine, a lot of uncertainty and questions there, especially joining into something like that nobody had really any answers on what the policies were going to be. But I do have an older brother in the Air Force, and it was something that I was pursuing from a pretty young age, very interested in since pretty much since as long as I could remember, really. So the big question mark of what was to lie ahead wasn't really enough of a deterrent to make me kind of shy away. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger, signed the papers, and next thing I knew, I was on a plane to San Antonio, Texas, and there I was at boot camp, and that's kind of when the story unfolds. Now, of course, I had enlisted as female, so I did go through female training. I was in a female flight, and at this point, I didn't allude to anybody else that I was transgender, just because, again, that big question mark, what that would really mean for me moving forward in service, and I definitely didn't want to say the wrong thing and get removed from service before we kind of knew what was going on and if I'd be allowed to transition and whatnot.
But the command and everybody else knew that you were transgendered at that point, or when?
So nobody in the training complex of San Antonio knew that. I didn't come out officially until I reached my first duty station. That was Scott Air Force Base. And I hit the ground there in, I want to say, November of 2018. And the game plan was to kind of lay low and play it cool, but as you know, you build pretty strong relationships with the people you're around and foster a lot of trust in those relationships. So I came out probably within 2 or 3 weeks of being at my first duty station. So everybody had known that was kind of the case. And the first person I'd come out to was my direct supervisor, my first NCO. And so it definitely had a strong bond of trust with her, and so I let her know. And over the next couple of months, we looked into what the process would really be, what that really meant for transitioning. And I went to mental health, and I got a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And at this time, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're into a section here that is kind of complicated.
Yeah,
gender dysphoria. So if you could, now there's some regulations governing this.
Yes.
I understand. And so the once you got in, you had there were things that you could legally do. There's things you could legally not do. There was the official diagnosis that evidently triggered some stuff.
Correct.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So at that point in time, no policy banning transgender service was in place. But of course, those Trump tweets were, it was kind of setting the tone that this was going to happen. So while the 2016 Obama era policy of open transgender service was still in place, it was almost like it was in place, but nobody really wanted to rely on that policy because it was so uncertain. But that was what I was forced to go off of, which states that to medically transition in the service, and this is, of course, relative to Air Force.
Austin, as we talk about this, one of the things I think that the viewers need to know about is what's called exceptions to policy.
Okay.
And that's exceptions to policy pertaining to transgender persons in the military.
Okay.
And there's an envelope of rights and prohibitions that have to be maintained if you want to stay in the military as an exception to policy under the original Trump prohibition, which has now been repealed.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit, just to inform our viewers what those exceptions to policy are and what was important to you? And then as we talk, people will see how those rights were crossed by the command in a way that was technically illegal.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. So it's important to note that, like I said, I'd entered service as female, correct? And so Trump had announced those tweets in 2017, the summer months, that alluded to a policy change. Now, by this time, the military was still operating under the 2016 Obama-era policy, which is the transgender people were allowed to openly serve and medically transition while in service, right? So what is needed to transition in service, I enlisted as female, would like to transition to male. Obviously, I've done so since then. So the first thing is a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And basically, gender dysphoria is, you can find that in the DSM-5. It is a diagnosable condition. And
what is GMS-5?
The DSM-5 is actually the diagnostic manual of mental health conditions, if you could say. And then we use that pretty widely in America here to diagnose different mental conditions, whether that be depression or whatever, and gender dysphoria is in there.
That is the official document of the American Psychiatric Association.
Correct, yes.
That's the Bible countrywide for both civilian and military psychological conditions.
Correct, yes, that's correct, Bob. This book, again, you can find gender dysphoria in there. And gender dysphoria, just to kind of explain that a little bit, gender dysphoria is simply put the mental disconnect between the physical anatomy of somebody and the gender that they identify with. So in my case, of course, I was born female and I identify as male. So you can imagine that some of the physical attributions of living in a female body were very emotionally stressful and really kind of caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of secondhand mental stress from the disconnect of identifying as male, but kind of like living in the wrong body for a sense. And that's where that term comes from, born in the wrong body. So that's what people are referring to as.
So as an example, and trying to find an example, during your high school prom, say, for instance, if you had to dress up in a nice dress in the high school prom, that caused anxiety.
Correct.
How much anxiety?
So, and there is to note, there are people out there that aren't necessarily, suffering from gender dysphoria, that aren't transgender, that would maybe prefer to dress a little bit more masculine in their female. And that's not the case with people that have gender dysphoria. People with gender dysphoria, it's something that affects your mental ability to live really. So something like you said there, wearing a prom dress. Now that's something that would, cause an anxiety attack to the point where you're having maybe even physical reaction to that anxiety of being perceived as female, dressing as female, and such a strong disconnect. If you went to prom in a dress, Bob, I'm sure you'd feel this is completely wrong, and it would make you feel very anxious, and your football buddies maybe seeing you in a dress. It would completely ruin the whole night. You wouldn't want to go anywhere, and you would just lock yourself up. And it kind of goes further than just the physical clothes and whatnot, but actually like physical anatomy. If you were to look down one day and you were in a female body, that would be extremely uncomfortable for you, and present a lot of mental stress and kind of affect a lot of different aspects of your life, socially, mentally, emotionally.
So let's walk through the process. You came out within a couple weeks, 3 weeks, And you went and you were diagnosed by the military psychologist
Correct.
with a certifiable psychiatric condition
Correct.
that was in the long term harmful to you.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I had been going to mental health voluntarily for several months in that command, and after months of evaluation and speaking with a therapist and got that diagnosis of gender dysphoria. By the time I had gotten that diagnosis, it was March 16th of 2018. Now the Trump kind of administration placed the ban on transgender service members on April 12th of 2019. So I had made it so far as to get my diagnosis, but I hadn't medically transitioned at all. So now I'm in this kind of weird window of, hey, we've made the connection and the correlation that this troop, myself, does have gender dysphoria. He is a transgender male. The current treatment to alleviate the symptoms of gender dysphoria would be to medically transition. Well, now we know that the policy has dropped on April 12th, and that's where I was what they call grandfathered in. So this policy didn't apply to me.
Because you were already in the service.
Already in the service and already diagnosed. Correct. Yeah. Already in the service and already diagnosed before April 12th of 2019. So I was grandfathered in and given the green light to go ahead and transition. And this is where I ran into a lot of those issues because I was serving and transitioning in a time period where, for lack of better words, nobody else really could. So that was very kind of confusing for a lot of people, and it was very, very easy for people to use it against me and kind of bar me from these medical services and whatnot that I was entitled to. A lot of confusion there.
How did your peers react to that?
So to be honest with you, the peers really did not have any type of issue. It was more so people that didn't know me personally and that didn't know I was transgender for whatever reason. Sometimes that didn't quite sit well with people. But as far as people that worked with me every day, I mean, they could attest to, hey, Austin, he can do his job. He is mentally sound. You know what I mean? He's a top performer, and I was very, well liked within the unit and well performing. So it was definitely kind of a testimony to the fact that I was transgender and had gender dysphoria had nothing to do with my ability or inability to serve because I was serving quite well.
Yeah. Okay, so you decided you were working well. You had good relationships with both your command and the people around you.
Absolutely.
And so then you began testosterone treatment. So can you tell me the transitions and problems that may have developed during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we do in the military to kind of mitigate any kind of confusion between the transgender troop and the command is when you first come out and you say, yes, I would like to medically transition, you are going to make what's called a transition treatment timeline. And this timeline is put together based off the needs and wants of the transgender individual, as well as mental health and the medical professionals. So you all kind of come to a consensus on what your treatment is going to look like, and that's placed on a timeline, which is then given over to command, and command kind of signs off and is made aware, okay, well, around these months, hormone replacement therapy is going to start. Around these months, these surgeries are going to take place. And so this kind of gives a roadmap to everybody, so there's no surprises on what's going to happen. And those things are kind of pre-approved, so to speak. And of course, when those things approach closer and closer, such as surgeries, additional evaluations are made within a couple of weeks of those surgeries to make sure that you're still mentally sound and fit and able to pursue the medical transition, right? So no surprises for anybody else. So the medical transition for me would be hormone replacement therapy, and then the breast reduction, so a top surgery is what they commonly refer to that as. So the top surgery, and then that also encompasses a lot of social transitioning. And what I mean by social transition is a lot of name change. So I legally changed my name, and changing of the gender marker, and kind of making the social transition between, hey, I entered as female and I was this name, but now I am Austin and I'm doing these things, and I would like it if you would refer to me as male. So the big thing I'll hit on there is the gender marker. So while you are able to legally change your name at any point in time in service, which many people do for a multitude of reasons, not just transgender people, the gender marker is kind of a sticky situation. Now your gender marker is going to determine for that troop, the facility use is the big thing, in dress and appearance. As you know, there's different male and female uniforms, and there's of course male and female, living quarters and locker rooms and whatnot. And unfortunately, the policy and how they determine that is what your gender marker is where you're going to go. It's how you're going to be, what bathroom you're going to use. It aligns with your gender marker, lodging, gender marker. And of course, for me, my gender marker is female, but I was on the hormone replacement therapy, so my voice was very deep, and I looked and passed very much as male, but when it came time to get in maybe like dress blues or something like that, it looks a little interesting when you have a mustache and you're in female, dress blues and whatnot.
Wearing a dress.
This is where that exception to policy comes in, and that exception to policy is actually an exception to policy to dress and appearance standards and facility use. So, for example, I would need a exception to policy to wear the male service uniform, and that is because my gender marker was female. Unfortunately, the gender marker is not allowed to be flipped until you are transition complete. And for some people, that can take years. You know what I mean? To complete all the surgeries and the hormone replacement and whatnot. That's a couple of year process. And so in the interim, as I said, you're on the hormone replacement therapy. You're very much perceived as male, looking male, sounding male, but you're in a female, dress uniform. It doesn't go hand in hand. That's where the ETP comes into place.
The ETP.
Yeah, the exception to policy.
Okay, and so what it had to happen, as I understand it, is that it's a fairly simple procedure. The commander has to sign off, your immediate commander, which would be some commissioned officer, in this case I believe a lieutenant colonel.
Correct.
And once that has occurred, then you transition under the military umbrella. You get your hormone replacement, you got your plan, and then at some point you go through the surgical procedures.
Correct.
And so can you tell me where things were when the whole process started getting sticky? We may have to backtrack a little bit at some point, and we'll try to do that without confusing the viewers. But can you tell me generally what happened and why that stopped?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, it's really unfortunate, and I can't lie. At the beginning, the command was very supportive, and they weren't very knowledgeable, but they were very willing to learn and kind of go through this process with me and kind of work out those question marks of what was going to happen. It wasn't really until later that, of course, we'll end up discussing with the viewers that some of the other things that had kind of happened throughout the unit that affected my transition was I found that it wasn't that these things were, the medical services and the things that were being barred and taken away. It wasn't because the command didn't like that I was transgender or there was any kind of issue with it. It was more of a separate issue, but they knew how important the medical transition was to me, and so it was oftentimes used as leverage against me. And then the policy, it's still very shaky, and I'm grandfathered, and I'm a very, very small percentage of people that were serving under that time and transitioning. So it really left little resource for me to kind of reach out to somebody and say, hey, the command is doing this or this or whatnot, and so it's almost even worse, as if the command had just completely rejected me and not supported me being transgender. But it's even more disheartening because I know that they did and they were willing to work forward. It was external factors, and then it was let's kind of punch him where it hurts and let's use this transition over him. And I think that's just inhumane, Bob, using someone's medical treatment over them for ulterior motives.
Yeah, especially when it was authorized.
Right.
The colonel had signed off on it, the lieutenant colonel.
Correct.
And so it was in process when some other things go into effect.
Right.
And so we'll just take a little break here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll move on to the next. So Austin, we talked about the CDI, the Command Directed Investigation, but we've kind of left it hanging. What was the final disposition of all that? What happened?
Yeah, so the CDI was launched, like I said, after the NCO, the perpetrating NCO, kind of flipped the script and tried to initiate and try to get ahead of the issue and kind of make herself look like the victim. So that CDI continues on. There was also some other additional evidence that I had provided to the investigative authority doing the CDI, the Chain Directed Investigation, regarding some of the multiple instances where this NCO was kind of let off the hook in the pattern of abusing her power and especially supplying the alcohol, whatnot. And when I had later asked why that was, what had come of that in the investigation, they told me, well, we didn't feel that that was pertinent, so it was left out of the investigation. So objectively, the other victims that she had done this to, and the multitude of evidence that I had was completely missed, and so that was left out of the investigation, sadly. Unfortunately, due to the negligence of the chain of command, they actually let the NCO, the perpetrator, PCS to the Air Force Academy, lo and behold.
And what was the impact of that?
So the impact of that is when a chain-directed investigation is developed, a disinterested third party will come in and gather facts, and once the fact-finding is done, it is presented to the commander, and the commander will have the final decision-making authority with legal's advice and whatnot. To discipline and what extent the perpetrators will be disciplined. Now, it is against policy if you are the subject or an accessory to a CDI that you should not, you won't be granted leave, and you will not be PCS, a permanent change of station. You cannot move to another military base while involved in that. And the chain of command completely disregarded that and allowed this NCO to move there. So that effectively took her out of our chain of command. So when the time came to close the investigation up and take a look at all the facts and say, okay, Commander, go ahead and do with what you will with all this information, when they presented those facts, it didn't matter what they said because she was no longer in our unit and he had no authority to punish her. So she went unscathed through the whole thing. And it unfortunately turns out that even with them dismissing that multitude of evidence, they still had enough to charge her with 3 counts of sexual harassment. So they did substantiate 3 counts of sexual harassment out of a total of, I believe, 12 allegations. I requested this report as I was legally allowed to do so. And of course, that report comes with a lot of redactions on there, so names and whatnot are blacked out. But as pretty much the center victim of the investigation, it was very easy for me to understand who was who, even though those names were redacted for privacy reasons. And it looked to me as though many things were very much downplayed, very much kind of skirted around the bush, for lack of better words, so that there wasn't other things that were substantiated. And out of the 12 allegations, like I said, 3 were substantiated. So now we have effectively proved that yes, indeed, this NCO was sexually harassing not only myself but other people. It was substantiated, and because they made the executive decision to allow her to move military bases while she was the primary suspect of an investigation, she could not be touched.
And where did she transfer to?
Sadly enough, she transferred to the Air Force Academy and is currently still there working officer promotions. So it's a very high level position.
Yeah, a high level position at the number 1 school for United States Air Force officers.
Correct.
And they don't have a screening system enough to catch that. So was the report forwarded to the Air Force?
So
the academy.
The correct way that this should have happened is first of all, she should have never changed military bases. So there is a policy stopping movement for personnel involved in the investigation. So when they disregarded that policy and let her move, there was no policy or anything that was going to guarantee that they forwarded this information to her new commander to make sure she was held accountable. So that never happened.
So you've got a potentially, or alleged person that was uncovered to be a sexual harasser, a female sexual harasser.
Yeah. Well, they proved that part.
Yeah, and she is now
at the Air Force
unscathed at the United States Air Force Academy.
Correct, and you could see how that could kind of fester some other future problems. Somebody with this moral nature and somebody that is capable of these kinds of evil things, working officer promotions, you could only venture to guess what that could lead to and what that could kind of fester out there and what further damage could be caused by that And again, it was all, put it frankly, the chain of command did not want her to be prosecuted. It was a series of negligence that, if it came to light what had happened, and if people were actually held accountable, other people would be held accountable, other leaders would be held accountable, and it was easier to transfer her and to put a false paper trail on me and boot me out of service than it was to back up and say, hey, we got this wrong, let's make it right. That didn't happen.
How long did the CDI sit on the commander's desk?
CDI sat on the commander's desk for, the whole CDI lasted upwards of about 6 months, I want to say, and I'm not sure how long it was on the commander's desk. All I know definitively is that she was not held accountable. No action was taken against anybody.
Okay, so the final action on that, the final report of the CDI was signed off on and handed to the commander from the outside investigator.
Correct.
After she had left.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know this to be fact as well, because as the center victim of the chain directed investigation, I also got a letter from my commander that says, we are closing this matter. I have decided to take no action. This matter is now closed. Signed, Commander. So,
in spite of many other things. Now, so we've covered that, and we've covered the action of the command on the letter of counseling, the LOC, and the letter of the LOR, which is the letter of reprimand, and that they were both approved by the command, signed off on by the command, and put in your permanent file. In spite of the fact that your fax said that both documents were incorrect.
Correct.
And they were accepted by the commander without change in spite of the investigations.
Correct.
Yeah. So we've got two places where, you look like you'd fit in a picture frame. Yeah. You were kind of framed, actually, is what happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, looking at the last leg of all these investigations, it was the investigation that you very insistently pushed the sapper to investigate, and there were problems. I remember getting them to investigate. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So sadly, Bob, just about every single agency that I reached out for help to put it plainly, failed me. Again, the CDI, we just discussed how that failed. The IG complaint that I did place, that escalated to DOD, Pentagon level, disappeared. Nothing ever came out of that, and no reason was given to me as to why it disappeared. And now, of course, with Sapper, I had to go to Sapper twice, not once but twice, to get them to actually hear and take my report. The first time being before any of this had really unfolded to this extent, and I had went in there and kind of really hit on some of the sexual harassment that was going on. Specifically, an incident where this NCO had kind of forcibly grabbed my thigh and tried to forcibly, remove clothing and such. And I was told that this was not sexual assault and that it did not warrant a Sapper report, that it was instead sexual harassment, and that I should go to the Military Equal Opportunity Office and to have a nice day. So I did not allude to Sapper at that moment that there was the actual penetrative sexual assault, because again, underage drinking, I was fearful for what could come out of that for me. So I go over to Military Equal Opportunity, and due to the fact that the chain directed investigation, the CDI, was already open, and it already kind of came into the lines of sexual harassment and unprofessional relationship, MEO refused to touch it. They said, we will not open an investigation, and we will not step on Commander's toes and touch what Command has decided to do. Have a nice day. So that went on for a couple of months, and I pleaded with them, and it got nowhere. And unfortunately, just goes to show how hit or miss some of these agencies can be. I want to discuss something else that kind of happened that was a major turning point, which was the NCO who had assaulted me had got a close friend of hers, another NCO in the squadron, to falsely accuse me. And coincidentally, this other NCO that had falsely accused me had said some eerily similar things, and it's similar to how I was assaulted by my NCO. And what I mean by that is that it was alleged that by this NCO that was a very good friend of my perpetrator, that I had tried to grab her inner thigh. And so she went to the SAPR office and they took her report. And then I was placed under investigation of a perpetrator. And it became very, very clear that this NCO, this second NCO, was trying to put it out there in the squadron, was very vocal about, hey, I went to SAPR and I accused Austin of this, this, and this, and kind of really forced out rumors at a rapid rate to get me looking like some kind of perpetrator or like I committed a rape to discredit me. It makes a lot of sense that I come forward and I accuse this NCO of sexual assault and whatnot, and I'm starting to bring light to the situation. And the NCO tries to play herself as the victim, but not only that, she recruits almost this friend to come forward and say, hey, try to put it on Austin, and it was framed in that way as well. And the further that was investigated, it was completely dropped and proven that nothing had happened. So that was a very traumatic experience, and so that triggered me to really think about why is it that when I went to SAPR initially, before anybody had known anything, as a true victim, and said, hey, these are some of the things that are happening to me, that I was pushed away and told, oh, go to the next guy, go to the next agency. But when a female goes in there and says, hey, this guy did this to me, same exact story, he touched my thigh, suddenly they took a report immediately. I was placed under investigation, and I was treated as a criminal, which is especially traumatic on its own, but especially when you are a victim and you're being treated as a perpetrator of the same type of act, it's very emotionally damaging. And so I went with a trusted friend to the SAPR office a second time, and I said, I would like to speak with the SARC. It has come to my attention that I have been falsely accused. Not only that, but that you took a report on a specific incident and were able to formulate a report on that, but when I had several months prior attempted to come in here and say the same thing happened to me, I was refused a report.
Were they upset by that?
Anger filled the room pretty rapidly at that point that I was kind of calling this out. And the first response was, how and why do I know that I've been accused? And how do I know what was said? And I said, well, it's very clear what's happening to me. The friend of my perpetrator is trying to force out this rumor mill that I am now a rapist. And so she is explicitly telling people, oh, I went to SAPR, Austin did this to me. And I go, it's the rumor mill. I heard it almost immediately because that was the intent, to make it the general public's understanding that I am, one, to discredit me, and two, that I'm a rapist. So, I go, ask anybody in the squadron. I'm sure they all know it's not a secret. Mm-hmm. And I go, I'm further very saddened and traumatized that, I'm telling you that, hey, I tried to come in and report the same thing. You told me no, but honored her report. You skipped past that and are now angry at me. And I was accused by the SARC that she said, well, Austin, it seems that there is a very clear correlation between yourself and these two NCOs. And at this time, I believe that you are trying to make a false report to in some way negatively impact these other people. And I was blown away by that. I was blown away that I had gone into the Air Force's largest victim advocacy program, and that I was told straight to my face that they did not believe me, and that I was kind of threatened that that's a serious offense, a false report.
Oh yeah, they can nail you on that. That
Absolutely.
That could be a bad conduct discharge just like that.
Absolutely. And so I said, I really am telling the truth, and there's even some more things that I didn't tell you the first time that because I was scared because of some underage drinking, and at that point the SARC stops and gets on her computer, prints out the definition of sexual assault, prints it out, hands it to me, and tells me to read it out loud, and this whole time it's kind of a tone and body language of disgust and of some sighing and really just kind of like I was wasting her time being in there. And she asked me to read it out loud, and I did. I'm now being humiliated at this point. And she said, "Do you really think that this definition matches what you are telling me?" And I said, "Yes, I absolutely do." And she said, "Okay." And at that point, they were forced to take my report, and I kind of, really laid in on them and let them know everything. And at that point, I just was so enraged that this was happening that I told them my full story and came forward and said, "This is what happened to me. I was, to my knowledge, roofied and raped, and there's some other things that are going on," and that you would have thought that would have changed their attitude on the whole thing, and they maintained, "No, you're lying. You're trying to get someone in trouble."
Yeah, and so there was. So who was talking to who? We know that your immediate supervisor and was it what was the name of that lady?
The immediate supervisor?
No, the other one, the friend of the immediate supervisor.
That was also another staff sergeant in the squadron.
Okay, yeah, okay. And so you had those two talking, and as this thing rolls out, you had the first sergeant in the loop, and and because of the other interactions with Sapper and Sark, you don't know if they were in the loop or not.
I have no idea.
But there was obviously the rumor and talk generation throughout that small group was enough to that if you didn't know, you were in the broom closet when people were talking. They just weren't around.
Right.
So yeah, it was a serious thing, and I think we so basically we've talked about the letter of counseling, the letter of reprimand. We've talked about the CDI. We talked about the IG inspection that went into nowhere. We've talked about now the Sapper, and I think the next thing we'll talk about will be kind of a compilation of all the reprisals that came at you during this. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because it's such a complicated story that if we can kind of categorize all these things, our viewers should be able to see the magnitude of what happened. So we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Taking me away and putting me in a dark corner, but emotionally and more so mentally, up until this point, I've been assaulted. I've lost all my friends. I've come forward and been told to shut up. I've maintained the strength and the courage to go to all these external agencies to help me. I've been failed and let down by every single one of them, embarrassed and further tormented by other ones like Sapper, and then I'm falsely accused and treated as a criminal for the very act that I'm trying to report. And then I have this paper trail built on me that is very clear that they're trying to remove me from service and kind of pegging me as this airman with disciplinary issues, which is very far from the truth. I was a very top performer before all this came to light. And now I'm in the gym, which really kind of showed me how disposable the unit viewed me, how unimportant I was, how unimportant the things that were happening to me and other people were. And it was kind of like a further step in humiliating me because, I worked in the base's records office. I was very well known to work in that office. And then I'm suddenly put into the gym. That's typically not how it works, and it's never that sudden. So for one day for me to be working in one office in one capacity, and for the next to be completely stripped away of all of my government accesses, my security clearance was pulled. Everything was taken from me in that moment, and then I was working the front desk.
There was no paperwork?
There was no paperwork for that.
Withdrawing on this, the security clearance?
My security clearance is gone, and no one can answer for it.
Oh, the paper, it used to be a kind of a yellow sheet like this.
It's all
electronic.
It's all electronic now, but
somebody pulled that, erased the data.
And here's
Is that what you're saying?
here's the more interesting part. When your security clearance is taken away from you, you are told, you're acknowledged that you do not have, you're not on a need to know basis anymore, and we're removing you from whatever security level, whether that be top secret or a secret. You know exactly what they're taking away from you, and there's documentation that you acknowledge that you no longer possess this level of security clearance. I was never given that. So it's gone. It's almost like, Bob, I never had the security clearance to begin with.
Hey, somebody had, well, you're in a personnel records office and somebody erased it.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened. That's how it was revoked. There was no letters saying your security clearance is revoked.
It was an inside job.
Your security clearance has disappeared.
It was an inside job, 100%.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
So I'm in the gym now, and of course, running into multiple people from the base. It was the base's fitness center, so it caused a lot of public humiliation. So just kind of the culmination of all these things really kind of hit me, and you look at what my job is now. My job is to sit there at a desk and stare at a wall. I had a lot of time to really look and reflect on what was happening, and I would say up until this point I had a lot of strength in me, but man, you get railroaded so many times that it's hard to maintain that. And so my already declining mental health had just hit the floor, and I was a lot of suicidal ideation was going on, and so throughout my time reporting all of this and going on, I had been very vocal about suicidal ideation, and there was one time specifically I remember speaking directly with Senior Master Sergeant Coffin, the 375th FSS superintendent, and I said, frankly, the way y'all are treating me, I'm gonna put a 45 in my mouth and pull the trigger, or I'm gonna jump off the roof, and I was literally laughed at. It was, Austin, come on now, and then I said, no, really, I will. I'm done, and I lost all hope in that moment, and you would think that the humanity, morality would kick in, and then they would, in some capacity, deal with such comments being made, and I was laughed at, and I was told, put up or shut up, specifically.
Who did that? Who said that?
Senior Master Sergeant Coffin.
CMS Sergeant Coffin,
Correct.
When you threatened suicide, said put up or shut up. I don't think that fits the normal prescription for somebody with suicide ideations, does it?
You would think, Bob, but
yeah, that's amazing. So what happened then?
Well, I'm at that point. I've been stripped of any kind of sense of self-worth. You get to a point where you're literally in tears begging for somebody to help you because you're at the point of taking your own life, and you get laughed at. I went home, and I had a multitude of prescription drugs thrown at me during this process.
By the medical people.
Medical, correct, yes. So it was prescribed drugs.
What do you call it?
Antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, and I'd had severe
which often
adverse.
have side effects,
Absolutely.
severe side effects. Some will cause suicide ideations. We
Correct.
have not discussed that or gone into that area, but prior research by many people say that there's a lot of drug interactions, and suicide ideation is a big one.
Absolutely. So, adjusting meds, there's a reason why it's done by a professional and a medical professional, is because it's not something to play around with. And while I was being prescribed all these medications, I would often go to medical and complain, hey, I'm having really severe symptoms, I'm passing out, I'm throwing up, I can't sleep. And they wouldn't pay attention to the adverse effects, and it seems like their solution to one drug making me have some kind of adverse effect was to just pile on another drug rather than withdraw or adjust a dose.
And that fit the technique. And again, it was a Fort Scott Airman that was at the medical center at Fort Scott for depression.
Correct.
And they never followed up on drug interaction tables, and they did the same thing. They added different drugs, they increased dosages, and because it is a military order, you have to take it once they write it.
You have to take them.
It potentially, without checking the drug interaction tables, could have directly resulted in suicide ideation, and it did result in hallucinations.
Hallucinations, severe physical, adverse reactions, throwing up, nausea, passing out, just a slew of kind of adverse actions. So, for as severe as symptoms I was having, they showed absolutely no concern. It was just piled on more so.
And they did not, when they were piling on, they did not remove other drugs. They just added to the spike.
Correct.
Which at Fort Scott, not Fort Scott, at Scott Air Force Base, there appears to be a pattern of that.
Yes, correct. Okay. So, extremely alarming that, mental health and medical professionals are not, on the same page there. And so, you could assume with that level of negligence that was happening, I was experiencing the suicidal ideations and, again, reaching out. So there's multiple failures across the board there, and I landed myself in a pretty scary situation where I did attempt suicide, and I had more than enough medications to mix and just kind of do a real number of damage, and so emptied good 3 or 4 bottles and went ahead and said, all right, this is it. And my recollection after that is very spotty. The next thing I remember is Senior Master Sergeant Coffin, the superintendent, being accompanied by a couple other individuals in uniform. Forcible entry into my barracks room, and it's kind of them trying to shake me awake, and that's really all I remember from that incident. And I was later filled in, of course. What had happened was, I of course attempted to overdose during the evening hours. Was unconscious in my bed, in and out of consciousness, for a number of hours, and did not wake up and report for duty. And so the duty date starts at 07:30 in the morning. It was around 09:30 in the morning, so some hours later that they had noticed that I was not at my duty location.
For staring at that wall.
Yes, very important duty location.
Yeah.
The wall did hold up, I'm told. Of course, the chain of command's reaction, knowing that I had been making comments like that, and knowing full well what they were doing to me, had reached out to sort of the old superintendent from the very beginning. That it was now long retired, and that was kind of trying to, help guide me through resources. And hey, here's some agencies that you can reach out to and whatnot. And so she was really, at this point, more of a personal friend now that she had retired. And so the chain of command, knowing that and knowing that really that's the only person I had, called her immediately and said, hey, there's where's Austin? Do you know anything about that? And so she didn't know where I was, of course, and that alarmed her, and they hung up the phone and said, well, before they hung up, they said, we think Austin might be in a suicide type situation. We think he's dead, and so we're gonna go to his room and check on him. And so at that point, you can imagine that kind of put some fear into that personal friend, the former superintendent, and she starts heading towards the base and the barracks, and simultaneously the chain of command is now coming to the barracks. They made forcible entry into my room, and found me unconscious, and surrounded by my own vomit, and I had been vomiting, and my body had been attempting to expel a number of the drugs that I had taken to try and overdose, and I had apparently woken up and gained consciousness and immediately thrown up almost everywhere. And so I was guided to the bathroom of my barracks room, and I was set in the tub, the shower tub floor. And they said, all right, well, you're awake. We'll get out of here. You grab a shower and be at work in a good 45 minutes or so. We'll talk about this when you get there. And at this point, I don't remember this to prove a point to how in and out of consciousness I was. I have no recollection of this. This is secondhand information. And it wasn't until, gosh, I don't know how much longer later, until the former superintendent, the personal friend now, who's been retired, had come to my room, and I think I might have tried to call her or something. Again, that's very spotty for me. It's hard to recall. And so she came to my room, and by that time, I was kind of coming out of it. It had thrown up most of what was in my system. There was nothing left to throw up. And so, she had called the chain of command back and said, "What the hell?" You know what I mean? I found him nearly dead on the floor.
So they left.
They left me. They left me to die in that room, Bob.
How long before your friend came?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Don't know.
So they came in there, threw you in a shower, walked out the door.
Pretty much.
Knowing that you had suicide ideations and there were pills and vomit everywhere.
Pretty much.
And basically, it was an attempted, probably, it was.
You don't leave a person.
It was an attempted murder.
You don't leave a person in that situation without.
It was an attempted murder by people in your command.
Yeah.
Manslaughter at the least. It would have been manslaughter probably.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I know we have some other things to discuss later on in our series here that go further into the. Now we're talking personal safety, where there was very much reason to believe that my life was in danger at the hands of the chain of command. So.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered some very shocking things here, and what we'll do in the next episode is because we've talked about the entire thing, we've kind of got a laundry list of, I think it was about 9 different separate reprisal actions taken against you from the beginning to the end.
Correct.
And I'll ask you to talk about each one a little bit because they're all quite shocking. So audience, please stay with us. We've got some really hot stuff to go through before we get what's going on. But when you aggregate them, you can see how big this effort was to suppress you. That all this paperwork went all the way up to the one set of paperwork went to the Pentagon where it died a peaceful death. One went up to the 2-star general where it blew up in their face. There was one line of paperwork that a person was actually found to have committed sexual harassment, which would normally get you kicked out of the service, but they escaped. And so there were a lot of different people that were evidently fearing that this thing would blow up underneath them, and they were willing to go out on a limb to make sure that you had a very miserable life. Okay. Now, there's 9 of them, and I'm just going to go through these one at a time so you can say a few words about them. Yeah. Now, the first one was when your immediate supervisor, your new immediate supervisor, put in a request for a command-directed investigation, and you were labeled as the perp.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit earlier about how I was actually the very, very first whistleblower, and was the initial requesting authority of the chain-directed investigation, and we kind of talked about how. After 3 or 4 meetings, they weren't. It was very clear that they weren't interested in doing that, and it wasn't until my NCO, my direct supervisor, and my perpetrator of my sexual assault had kind of realized that, okay, I can see him going into these meetings. I know something's up, and it kind of went into that self-preservation mode and requested a no contact order against me, and kind of started to formulate the timeline of. Austin is the perpetrator and I'm more of a victim, and the chain of command directly knowing that I had been telling them for eons at this point that I was the original whistleblower, very clear that I was the victim in this statement in the situation, and they still deliberately kind of took her hand in that formulating the story that I'm the issue here, and labeled me as a suspect. And luckily I fought hard and I advocated and I got myself that lawyer, and refused to make any statements. And then they realized they couldn't really do that. So that was really the only one that I was really able to save myself from.
Yeah, and that was the command directed investigation.
Correct.
But then after that, they tried to issue a letter of counseling.
Correct, a letter of counseling.
And that one you basically you rebutted it, but they did it anyway.
Correct.
Yeah.
So both the second and third instances here, the LOR and the LOC, I rebutted both of them and presented straight facts. It was not a matter of interpretation. It was you did this. Well, no, I didn't. And here's 5 or 6 non-disputable facts that prove that I did not. And those pieces of paperwork were maintained in my permanent file to dirty up the file, dirty up my track record. So.
Yeah, and the letter of reprimand, which was a much more serious thing, and on that one, there was some interesting nuances on that one, I believe, as to how that one.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And what were those nuances?
And we spoke a little bit about this earlier, but the letter of reprimand, they tried to frame that in a AWOL-like situation where I was out of the office, I was not at work in my duty location, and they had no idea where I was, and it was almost classified as an AWOL situation. And what's particularly interesting about that is, aside from all of the pieces of evidence that I had that said that I had very well communicated prior that I would be absent for this period of time during that specific day, it just so happened that when I was in a separate room talking on the phone with my lawyer, and that's what the meeting was about, that one of my NCOs had come in and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that you were on the phone with your lawyer in here," and exited the room. And then, of course, a couple days later, they attempted to say they had no idea where I was for several hours. And so my lawyer had formulated a statement that said, "Hey, I was on the phone with Austin, my client, and I actually heard this firsthand," which is kind of unusual for a lawyer to step in and present a personal statement to help the case. Usually,
but he's under a court oath, so he cannot lie.
He can't lie, but but he is a United States Air Force attorney. His interest is in the Air Force, not me as a client, and he backed me up.
Now, after that LOR, which of course that was the one that the signature authority was the commander, the lieutenant colonel.
Correct.
There were some personal things that happened to you that I don't think ever made a record, but can you tell me about those? And you were fearful, I remember, and you moved, and
Correct.
you can tell me about all that and whatever happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the situation, this was after the attempt and whatnot.
The attempt
of suicide, the attempted suicide.
Okay, after
so
the attempted suicide.
After that, I was clearly alive after that. You would think that would kind of be okay. He almost died. Let's ease up. At that point, this is when the question of, did they leave me on the floor intentionally or unintentionally, with the understanding that it could be fatal. The next things I'm about to explain very clearly show that the decision to leave me on the shower floor was 110% with the intention that I would pass away. And so I lived a couple miles away from the base. I at this point had moved off base out of the barracks, and I had an apartment, and I lived alone. And I remember one day I went to work, and I had a dog, and I put the dog in the kennel every day before work and whatnot, and I kept the house pretty tidy. Went to work, came back, and my doors were still locked. Everything was locked. There was no forcible entry signs of my apartment, but when I opened my door, my entire house was ransacked. So, the dog was let out of the kennel. Things that were upstairs were brought downstairs. Things that were downstairs were brought upstairs. And everything was, nothing was stolen either. Nothing was missing at all. So it was kind of a thought that, oh gosh, did I get robbed while I was at work? Well, that doesn't make sense because my doors were locked still. And so, and there was no signs of forcible entry. So it was very much, we're here, we know where you live, clearly, because we have record of where all the troops live. And we can get in here and we can
make you heard.
We can make you heard. And a good thing you weren't home.
Yeah.
And that sparked a lot of fear, as it would for anybody, because at this point there was a thought: do I make a police report? Do I not make a police report? And so there was no forcible signs of entry, so I knew that it wasn't a robbery or anything. It was very clear, the message, that it was from the chain of command, and so alerting civilian authorities wasn't really an option anymore. And then as far as reporting this to any kind of security forces of the military, I mean, Bob, if you look at the track record of me speaking out, it hasn't gotten me very far. So at this point, I've just dropped the incident, and I've decided that it was best if I packed a couple of nights worth of overnight supplies and whatnot, and I went and I stayed at the old superintendent's house, the one well retired. Like I said, she was more of a personal friend at this time. And so we all decided that it was best, her and I and her family, that if this is the type of thing that was going to go on, and if it was uncertain with what my safety looked like, that it was better for me to, rather than live alone, spend a few nights sleeping on their couch. And so in doing that, we had noticed that they didn't give up. The chain of command did not give up in the scare tactics. They drove past our house several times. We had several instances where people would park cars outside of my friend's home and take pictures of my vehicle in front of her house, sort of scare tactics and whatnot. And in this friend of mine, personal friend, she was retired, but of course very high ranking and used to, while she was active duty, have a very close professional relationship with the commander of the unit. And so she went in and said, hey, I know I'm retired and I'm sitting before you as a civilian, but what's going on? There's people at my house taking pictures. I have a family, I have children. This is not acceptable, and this needs to be stopped, and I won't stand for it. I'm not afraid of you, basically. And I won't be scared into silence, and neither will Austin. And so immediately after that, to my knowledge, no action was taken on anybody, but it did immediately stop. So it kind of confirms that it was.
Yeah, it was a reprisal that was meant for you alone.
Correct.
And not for paperwork. It was just another illegal. It was a gang threat.
Throughout my entire time.
Like putting a horse's head in somebody's bed, like in the movies.
Pretty much, yeah. And throughout my entire time, through the unit, several comments were made. You know what I mean? And there's, gosh, probably looking back on it, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of snide comments that were made by people in the chain of command, and kind of under their breath and at me. And I remember some of those things started forming into, well, you're already, excuse the English, but batshit crazy, and you already have an attempt on your record, and you already have been going to mental health the whole time you've been in the Air Force, and so, if something happened to you, well, it wouldn't be hard to believe it's a suicide.
And they said that.
That was said, yeah.
Can you say who said it, or
I'm not going to speak on that.
Okay. Then we'll look at the commander denied your expedited transfer. You were trying to get out of there, and this was after the suicide.
Correct.
Or suicide attempt. And what happened, and what were the implications and the consequences of denying you the expedited transfer?
Yeah, absolutely. So the expedited transfer, and just to kind of put an educational piece out there, an expedited transfer is something that can be requested by a sexual assault victim if they make an unrestricted sexual assault report, which, as you remember, I went to Sapper, and I had to fight to get that report made, but it was made. And so at that point, once you make that report and it's unrestricted, the victim is entitled to request an expedited transfer to a base of their choice. Now, this isn't willy-nilly, go wherever you'd like, go ahead and enjoy Hawaii. It's not like that. It's you have to say, well, due to my sexual assault and the following surrounding the assault. The current installation that I'm on is causing mental distress, and I would like to transfer to a base where I am close to a support system. So for me, my family was in Arizona.
Mhm.
So for me, I had to request a base in Arizona, and so there were two bases in Arizona. So I said, okay, these are the two bases I'm requesting. One of those bases was 20 minutes away from my childhood home, where my entire family still resided. So that is the intent of an expedited transfer: to remove the victim from a harmful and toxic environment and put them in a environment at a base there they can still fulfill military duties. You're still going to work every day, but you are able to also foster a nurturing and supportive environment to hopefully heal from the military sexual trauma. So,
and the commander did that and refused to sign off on it.
correct. I put in the request, and my commander denied my request, which is extremely unusual. In the Air Force, it's very, very unusual for them to deny an expedited transfer. Normally, the Air Force does not like to kind of put their hands in the pot, and what somebody says as the victim will help them heal, and rightfully so. So they denied it, and my squadron commander, the 05, the same commander that had given me the LOR and maintained it despite the facts, the same individual here, denies it and said that his reason for denial was that my mental health was too poor to withstand a transfer of base like that, and within the policy of the Air Force, mental health is actually, believe it or not, it is not a consideration factor. The consideration factors for expedited transfer is always it's did the victim make a sexual assault report that is unrestricted? That's it. Now, that's not to say that there can't be issues with manning, and maybe the base that you're wanting to go to is extremely overmanned and they just can't do it. In that case, and just to put into perspective how seriously they take, or supposed to take, the healing of the victim, it is not uncommon for somebody to request a base as an expedited transfer and have that career field that individual is in be overmanned at that base. They will retrain you a whole new job. They'll give you a whole new job, which is expensive training to invest in a person. They will most often than not retrain you. They'd rather retrain you than deny you access to the base of your preference based off of the support.
Now, after this, or during this whole thing, the denial created, some appeals.
Correct.
And the appeals were basically on the mental health status. And it appeared that they were moving to try to get you out on a personality disorder. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the point that my expedited transfer was denied, I had did not have any inclination of any kind of personality disorder that they were attempting to diagnose me with. And my lawyers had told me, well, it is extremely unusual the way that they had denied your expedited transfer, and the reason for denial is not. It's not a true reason for denial, so we're going to appeal this. And the appeals process calls for the first general officer in the chain, and in my case, that was 2-star general, so Major General Barrett of 18th Air Force. He was the 18th Air Force commander. So a couple of days later, we find ourselves in a meeting comprised of myself, 2-star general, Major General Barrett of 18th Air Force, my lawyer, my squadron commander, the 05, my first sergeant, and the commander of mental health. And so my lawyers were discussing the fact that the expedited transfer was denied off of a basis that is not
within the
conducive.
regulations.
Yeah, it's not within regulations. It's not conducive to deciding factors. And so that is why the appeal is coming through. And mental health chimes in at this point and says, well, we think it would be especially harmful for Austin to go through a change of permanent change of station and go to another installation because of his mental health. And his mental health is so bad that the commander decided that it was necessary to reach outside of regulation determination to specifically pinpoint mental health. And so before this meeting, my commander had directed me to mental health to be evaluated for fitness of duty. And so that was another question that was brought up, and that evaluation was set to happen in a couple of days from that point. So when this meeting is happening, my lawyer says, well, I noticed that the commander denied his expedited transfer and then immediately told him that he needed to go to mental health to be evaluated for fitness of duty. That doesn't make very much sense. It's weird that it happened back to back like that. It seems like there's an ulterior motive, but what's more interesting is if Austin was truly unfit for duty, he has been being seen by mental health his entire career. Mental health would, if they're doing their job, right,
would flag it.
Would flag that this individual is unfit for duty, and they never once flagged me until now, until they really needed to get me out of service. And so, mental health commander chimes in again and says, well, that is the fact. We've become increasingly aware that his mental health is so bad. He's extremely unpredictable and displays a lot of symptoms of personality disorders and conditions that are not conducive to service. And so my lawyer, bells and whistles went off at that point, and my lawyer said, well, that's very interesting that you should comment on my client's mental health because this mental health evaluation is set to take place in 2 days from now. So I'm interested, please tell me how you can comment on my client's mental health. Have you ever met Austin in person? And mental health kind of freezes and goes, well, no, I haven't met Austin in person. Okay, you're saying something about a personality disorder. That's nowhere in his record until now. Have you ever seen him in a clinical setting that you could make such comments? Well, no, I haven't seen him in a clinical setting. Okay, so you're now attempting to tell me that we think Austin's unfit for duty, and that's a brand new concept, and this personality disorder is a brand new concept, and the evaluation to determine both of these things hasn't even happened yet, but you somehow have the results to them now. So that is really, really interesting to me. Two-star general cuts off my lawyer, says give me the paper, signs it, and I had my expedited transfer within 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was reprisal plus justice, and the risk had they nailed you with a personality disorder would have been that it's pretty much automatically a pre-existing condition, and so the VA cannot get into it and cover the costs of things.
I would have gotten no benefits, no veteran services, because it would have been a pre-existing condition.
So eventually, Austin actually did get his transfer to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Phoenix. Even then, there was another attempted reprisal, but he finally got there. Austin stayed for 3 months and was offered the opportunity to stay in the Air Force. However, given the trauma that he'd gone through because of the cover-up of the rape, he asked for a discharge and was given an honorable military discharge with a notation that the reason was for personality disorder. That was the final record from the U.S. Air Force and effectively blocked him from receiving benefits from all the trauma that had occurred. However, the VA stepped in at the end when he went to the VA and awarded him a 50% disability payment for post-traumatic stress disorder because of the sexual assault. And this was the first instance where the U.S. government had recognized that Austin had been sexually assaulted in spite of all the investigations. This is Bob Kraus, wishing you a great day and hoping that you've had some good lessons from what we've presented here. Thank you.